Hello lovelies, I'm TrueCrimeCaitlyn and welcome back to my channel and another true crime case. For today's case we're going to be talking about merciless murderer Robert Mone. Before continuing to listen, please make sure to check the description box below for my disclaimer and for any trigger warnings. Robert Francis Mone was born in Dundee, Scotland in 1948. He lived with his parents and two sisters, but he did not have a good home life. His dad, also named Robert, was extremely violent and would subject the family to brutal beatings, which were worsened when he was drunk, which was a lot of the time. Robert would later say that at age 12, his dad allowed a family friend to rape him. After this, Robert began experiencing depression and his behaviour changed. At school, he wasn't a model student, and teachers would even describe him as like, quote, a live grenade in the classroom. He would go on to be expelled from St. John's High School in 1964. After the expulsion, Robert went on to join the Gordon Highlands, which is a part of the British Army. He would be posted in West Germany, where he would be bullied and he'd be shunned after he had to give evidence against two senior officers. This amplified his feelings of depression, and just like his father, he turned to alcohol and began to excessively drink. On the 1st of November 1967, 19-year-old Robert had been drinking at the Fennel pub, which was close by his old school, St. John's. Looking over at the school triggered memories of his bad time there, of the bullies and of the embarrassment that he felt when he was expelled. He would go home and change into his Gordon Highlands uniform. He concealed a shotgun in a brown paper bag and made his way back to St. John's. Robert entered the classroom of 26-year-old Nanette Hansen, who was teaching a group of 11 14 to 15-year-old girls needlework. Nanette was a relatively new teacher at the school. She had only begun working there in the summer term. She was also 6 months pregnant. Upon entering the classroom, Robert bared his shotgun, stating that they were all now hostages. Nanette tried to talk him down and get him to do the right thing, but she was ignored. The pupils were forced to move their desks and barricade the door so that nobody could get in the classroom. At one point, Robert had fired a warning shot and the whole school, which was over 1,000 students, evacuated and a state of emergency was declared. During the time that Nanette and the pupils were held hostages, Robert sexually assaulted one pupil and raped another. The pupil who was raped later spoke out and said that she believed that she was picked to be raped because she was the tallest girl in her class. He had summoned her, saying, quote, "Big Yin, come here." He had then proceeded to hold a gun to her head while forcing her to strip, threatening to shoot if she refused. This girl was only 14 years old. He shot at two pupils but missed, and he also shot through the window to the police, taunting them. Throughout most of this, a marksman with a sniper had Robert in his sights, but he was never given the go-ahead to shoot him. Police brought in Robert's nana in hoping that she could talk him down from what he was doing. He demanded to see an acquaintance of his, which was a woman named Marion Young. She immediately volunteered to go up and into the classroom, hoping that she could help. The women successfully managed to convince Robert to let the pupils go, and they fled from the classroom at about 4:30 p.m. When it came time for Nanette to leave the classroom, Robert said, quote, "Not you, you're not going, I want you here." He forced Nanette to turn around and face away from him and then shot her in the back twice. When she fell to the ground, Robert began to cackle, somehow finding shooting a pregnant woman funny. A detective sergeant at the scene pleaded with Robert to let the head teacher, Brother Bede, inside so that he could perform Nanette's last rites. When Robert opened the door, he was ambushed by officers and handcuffed, and all through this he was just laughing. Two officers marched Robert out of the school 90 minutes after he entered. All of this happened so fast in such a short amount of time, and I know that from reading articles when I was researching that a lot of the students in that class still feel traumatized about what had happened to this day. Nanette and her baby would sadly die from her injuries later in the hospital. It's believed that his motive for this was as an act of revenge to the school for expelling him 3 years prior. After this ordeal, Marion was awarded the George Medal, which is awarded to civilians for acts of bravery for her part in helping save the students. And despite her death, Nanette was awarded the Albert Medal, which we now call the George Cross. This is to recognise a person who has saved lives. When Robert was arrested and charged with murder and sex offences, he was totally unbothered. He showed no remorse or really any emotion at all. All that he did do was draw coffins all over his paperwork. He appeared at Dundee Crown Court on the 23rd of January 1968, and after only 18 minutes he was deemed unfit to stand trial on the grounds of insanity. He was found to be extremely schizophrenic as well as suffering with depression. He was sentenced to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure at Carstairs, which is a mental hospital. At Carstairs, Robert appeared to be somewhat of a model prisoner. He took to writing, eventually becoming the editor of the State Observer, which was the hospital's magazine. As part of his job as the editor, he was given a camera and he was allowed to kind of roam free around the hospital in search of news or material to put in the magazine. Along with writing for the State Observer, he also wrote plays which were admired by many, and he really showed off how intelligent he was by almost completing a law degree with London University. I say almost, as in 1976, Robert, along with a fellow prisoner and alleged lover, Thomas McCulloch, escaped the hospital. Thomas was sent to Carstairs in 1970 after he had murdered a member of staff at the Erskine Bridge Hotel and attempted to murder another. His reason being that there wasn't enough butter in his sandwich. He shot the chef of the hotel in the face, killing him, and he had shot a waitress in the shoulder. Thankfully, that was not fatal. The pair had meticulously planned their escape over the span of 6 months. Over this time, they managed to collect various items, including weapons such as an axe, knives, and garrots, which is basically like a length of wire which can be used for strangulation. These had used guitar strings. They also managed to collect fake beards and mustaches from the drama department. They made fake IDs, and they even managed to make a rope ladder which they would use to scale the wall and escape. I have no idea how they were able to collect and store these items. Like, you would think in a place like this they would notice an axe going missing or knives going missing. It would take the hospital a fatal 40 minutes to realise that Robert and Thomas had escaped. Prior to actually escaping Carstairs, they murdered 2 men who were in their way. These were 46-year-old nurse Neil McClellan and fellow patient 40-year-old Ian Simpson. Both men had paint stripper thrown in their eyes before being hacked to death with the axe. Thomas then proceeded to cut off Ian's ears and kept them in his pocket as trophies for the murder. Robert and Thomas then cut the phone lines to the hospital before using their made rope ladder and escaping. The pair now needed to get away from Carstairs, and they followed their plan. Robert lay on the road pretending to be hurt while Thomas waved down a passing car. This happened to be a police car, and 2 officers, PC George Taylor and PC John Gillies, got out of the car to help. Both officers were brutally beaten and attacked with the axe and knives. PC John Gillies managed to escape and got to a nearby house where he reported what had happened. PC George Taylor was left for dead and bleeding heavily. He managed to stop a bus who drove him to the hospital, but he would sadly die shortly after his arrival. PC George Taylor was only 27 years old and a father of 4. His family have since been trying to get him awarded for his bravery, but shockingly their pleas have been denied. Their police car was stolen by Robert and Thomas, however they crashed it only 10 miles away in Big R. After this crash, they just went straight back to their plan and posed as injured men waving down help. A works van pulled over, offering these men help, and they were met with an attack. Robert and Thomas forced the 2 men inside of the work van into the back of the van and locked them inside. They then proceeded to drive this before they crashed into a field. I tried finding what had happened to these 2 men, and I'm pretty sure that they didn't die, that they survived, but I couldn't find how they were found or what else had happened to them or anything. Where they had crashed, they noticed a little farmhouse in the distance, so they made a beeline for it. Covered in blood, they made their way into the farmhouse where a family of 2 adults and 4 children were relaxing watching TV. I can't imagine how terrifying this must have been for the family. I mean, this farmhouse was in a relatively isolated area, and now these 2 men covered in blood bearing weapons are in your house. It just must have been so scary. Robert ripped the family phone out of the wall and demanded the keys to the family car. Once he got the keys, he and Thomas took off, thankfully not harming the family. Now authorities were finally aware of the Carstairs' escape. They were actively and desperately searching for Robert and Thomas. Eventually they found them driving this family's car, and this was the beginning of a huge car chase. They led police all the way down to Carlisle, and thanks to the help of 3 forces, they managed to force the car onto a slip road where they eventually crashed. Still in a bid and desperate to escape, they attempted to try and hijack another car, but they were very quickly restrained and handcuffed. This whole ordeal from the escape to being captured was only 3 hours long. In 3 hours, they had murdered 3 people, they had traumatized a family, they had stolen 3 vehicles and tried to flee. The following February in 1997, both Robert and Thomas appeared at the High Court in Edinburgh, where they were both given whole life orders, being the first in Scotland to receive these orders. Robert's time in prison would be a rocky one. He was incarcerated at HMP Perth, where he was very vocal about how he believed he was being mistreated. He made claims that they were turning him into a junkie, giving him too many sleeping tablets because of his high category. In May 1981, while working in the laundry part of the prison, he actually managed to escape again to the roof where he began a protest. He shouted about his living conditions, saying that he had a lack of privacy. He complained about being in his cell 23 hours of the day over the weekend and 16 hours a day during the week. He complained that the light was always on in his cell. He claimed to get no recreational time at all, and his biggest complaint was that wherever he went, 2 prison officers were always present with him, even during visits when he actually had to sit in a wire cage. After 8 hours of protesting on the roof, he did eventually come down. As the years passed, Robert seemed to have shaped into a reformed prisoner, and he would even speak and do speeches at rehabilitation conferences. But a leopard never changes its spots. In 1994, Robert would attack another inmate by throwing boiling water over them. For this, he got an additional 6 months added to his sentence. He was then given a warning after he assaulted a prison officer by throwing some cake off them. In 1996, he was attacked and stabbed by a fellow inmate and actually had to be taken to Perth Royal Infirmary for treatment. In 2007, Robert was allowed a day trip to Crieff, which outraged the public understandably. He was actually in the process of being moved to a more open prison to eventually be released on parole at this time. And I know what you're thinking, didn't he get a whole life order? Doesn't that mean that he's in there for the rest of his natural life? He did get it, but it was overturned by the Human Rights Act on some sort of formality. So like I said, he was in arm's reach of being released on parole when he got into a fight. This caused his release to be delayed and he was transferred to Peterhead prison. Robert is currently still behind bars in Glenakill prison, where he works as a pass man, kind of cleaning offices and scrubbing toilets. For this he gets paid £13 a week. He is 74 years old and he is Scotland's longest serving prisoner. Thomas McCulloch, who escaped Carstairs with Robert, was actually released in 2011 at age 71 and he lives in the Dundee area. Now, we're not quite at the end of this case just yet. I'm going to take yous all back a little bit. So I mentioned Robert's dad earlier on in the video. His name is also Robert. After hearing about his son's crimes, he drunkenly boasted to his friends that he was gonna outdo and do one better than his son. His friends just brushed it off as drunken words that had no real intentions behind them, but Robert Sr. was being serious. He wanted to outdo his son. He thought it was some sort of sick competition. On the 29th of December 1978, Robert Sr. went to visit his 78-year-old auntie at her flat. Here, he would murder his auntie, along with her friend who was there and a 26-year-old newlywed. He was caught by the police as the one who had done this crime after he had left a ring at the scene which was gifted to him by his son, Robert. In 1983, only 3.5 years into his 15-year minimum sentence, Robert Sr. was stabbed to death in Craiginshire prison. The prisoner who murdered him said that he was, quote, probably the most obnoxious man in the country. And that is today's awful case. Robert is such a dangerous man. I think there's nothing scarier than these killers who kill for fun. I really hope that he doesn't get released and that he gets the help that he so obviously needs. And the fact that his dad wanted to one-up him and do one better, and in the process of doing that murdered 3 innocent people, is just sick. It's totally sick. Comment down below and let me know what you think about today's case. Thank you all so much for sitting and listening with me today. I have linked all of my social media in the description box if you would like to follow me on any of my other platforms. I cover true crime on TikTok as well. I have also linked all of my source material there too. And I just wanted to quickly say a massive thank you for getting us to 2,000 subscribers. I literally can't believe it. I'm so happy. Thank you all so much for your continuous support. I really appreciate it, and I will see you all on my next one.